Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the Old Geezer Show, coming to you live from my living room. What can you say? No, it's not really, is it? It's a green screen with a nice illustration behind me. And we're looking at today a couple of things that really sparked me off when I saw them in the paper this morning. And I was reading in detail, and I've done a bit of follow-up research. And today we're going to talk about prisons, and we're going to talk about murder and rape and horrible things. I don't have a problem talking about them. If you find talking about them offensive, I suggest perhaps you might be best to not watch, because we're going to talk about facts and figures that you may find, I don't know, slightly offensive. I don't know. We'll see. But we'll run them up. We'll run things up the flagpole and see who salutes. What a dreadful thing to say. Okay, going to start with this one. Because this is the one that kind of gets all of our, I don't know what you'd say, it gets the juices going, does it really? Not for me. I think it gets you a bit kind of bothered, doesn't it? The prison gates. And let's take a look at the prison information. We all think that courts have become lax and don't really care and don't bother about stuff and stuff like that. And in fact, it transpires that as far as much of the judicial system is concerned, they've got tougher rather than weaker with criminals. You have to bear in mind when you look at this figure that the average sentences are quite low because most crimes are relatively minor. We're looking at the figures on murder and serious crimes that people get convicted of, and it comes out very clearly that most crimes are, I guess you'd say, kind of on the margins of society. They're not big crimes, they're minor crimes, but they are crimes that are serious enough to go to prison for. People like Inez, who we're going to talk about later, and Carrick, who we're going to talk about in a minute, crimes that affect people like that or that are committed by people like that tend to attract big penalties. So, in other words, David Carrick got sent down for apparently around 30 years before he could be considered for any form of release, whereas Andrew Innes, who murdered a mother and little toddler up in Dundee, got sent down for 36 years fixed minimum term. So there's those two guys, and I want to talk about them in more detail shortly. But first, I want to just talk about prison, because prisons are really quite odd places when you think about it. Look at that. 39, that's nearly 40% of released prisoners reoffend within the first 12 months, and 75% reoffend within 9 years of release. Now, those figures come from the Prison Reform Trust. And the problem that you have with those is that there's all kinds of figures kicking about, if you like. And I chose the Prison Reforms Trust because I felt very strongly that they would be the people who knew what they were talking about. So there you go. So those are the actual figures that concern us. And one of the things I do think is really, really important to consider is that those figures show that we haven't got the best record in reoffending. America is equally awful. But some countries do things somewhat differently. Like Norway, for instance, has a very different kind of prison system, and they get very low reoffending rates, essentially because they try and change the course, the lives, whatever you might say, of those prisoners that they have in prison. The prison officers work with them to try and help them to live better, because the reality that you see from those bottom figures, the reoffending figures, is you must believe you're not going to get caught again to do the crime again, because you know if you do a crime, you're going to prison. So you must be, you must be willing to suspend disbelief. I won't get caught this time. And in fact, there you go, 40% reoffend. Okay, so I think we've got to do something with the UK's prison system, and I would love to hear from you and hear what you think we ought to do with the UK's prison system, because it's very obvious that there is something going wrong with it. Now, moving on to the main kind of topic on today's show, I wanted to share this with you because this one really gets me. There is that man, David Carrick. He is an ex-police officer, a man with a very, in real terms, powerful job. Even if you're an ordinary police constable, you still have a very great deal of potential power and potential respect. And David Carrick, I think, used that to commit awful crimes, 48 rapes against 12 women over a period of years, and a lot of other crimes. He was actually, I think he got 85 serious offences, and he was told he wouldn't be eligible for release for at least 30 years. What the hell is that about? The average annual cost of keeping a prisoner in at last year's and 2021's prices was about 48.5 grand. So the cost for keeping David Carrick in prison for the next 30 years is £1.5 million, near as damn it. What do you make of that? What do you think? I think that's awful. I think that's a ludicrous sum of money. And I think that we need to do something to put this one right. And I think he's going to have an awful time as an ex-police officer who's been committed of those for those crimes in prison. I think he's going to have an awful time. And I would like to save him that awful time. If we could have a whip round, I would gladly contribute £100 towards the cost of a lethal injection. I'd do that any time of the day or night if we changed the law on some major crimes and said, stop this. If you're stupid enough and keep doing it, we'll just bump you off because we don't want you to do it again. That's effectively what we're doing by taking that man out of society. We are effectively killing him. We might as well practically do it and save ourselves a lot of money. The same thing goes for this guy. That's Andrew Innes, who committed an awful crime. He kind of online seduced Benny Lynn Burke, who was not an English citizen until she came here, but she moved over here and she was looking for a partner. Who knows what was going through her mind? But this man, Innes, drove them to his home in Dundee, where he murdered both the mother, who was just 25, and the daughter, who was just 2 years old. At the same time, he was keeping another child in his house who he raped multiple times. This guy has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 36 years. And that means that the cost for keeping him in prison in the UK is £1.75 million. £1.75 million to keep this bloke alive. Personally, again, I'd gladly subscribe £100 to go towards a lethal injection. I believe that this man and also Carrick, that's what should happen. Isn't that an awful thing to say? I think that's a dreadful thing to say. But I cannot see why we would pay all of that money to keep the buggers alive. It doesn't worry me, to be honest with you, because I ain't going to pay it. I'm too old to keep paying for much longer for anything. The reality is that this comes out of the public purse. So between themselves, David Carrick and Andrew Innes are going to cost Great Britain. Are you ready for this one? Going to cost Great Britain £3.25 million over the next 30 odd years. That to me is completely ridiculous. Why do we do that? I really don't know. What do you think? I would love to have your opinion. I don't know if you've thought about this one at all, but I have to say that I look into the future and I look at what you can almost call our generation's investment into the future. And we see it being frittered away on keeping people like these two guys alive. 48 to 50,000 pounds a year each to keep David Carrick and Andrew Innes alive, fed, looked after in prison. I don't honestly believe either of them are worth it, and I do honestly believe that we need to do something about that one. But we also need to look at prisons and make them work better for the vast majority of prisoners, because those two guys are kind of cases on their own. The average prisoners in prison have not done major crimes and deserve a lot more help. And I really do believe that. There you have it. Okay, what are we going to say to you on that one? I'm going to say I enjoyed doing that. I hope you found it interesting. If you're watching on Catch Up, I do read all of the comments, good and bad. If you don't like what I've said, that's fine with me, but tell me. If you like what I've said, that's good with me too. Tell me that. Okay, let me just straighten things up here on my little desk and say thank you so much for watching. Whether you're watching live or online Catch Up, then thank you again. I love having your company. You can always get in touch with me via Facebook or via YouTube, direct message. And if you want to get in touch, please do. I'm Chris. This is the Old Geezer Show, and I'd love to see you soon. Do take care of yourselves. See you later.